Hey, did you know Benjamin Netanyahu's predecessor was assassinated while in office? And a lot of people think that he was at least partially to blame. See, back in 1995, former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin had just won a rather controversial Nobel Peace Prize, along with Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres, for signing the Oslo Accords. Now, the Oslo Accords were meant to be the first step towards long-term peace between Israel and Palestine, and also the first steps towards Palestinian self-governance and self-determination. Now, this is not a video about Yitzhak Rabin or the Oslo Accords being amazing or perfect. Both are worthy of plenty of criticism. But the far-right Israeli protests in response to their prime minister negotiating with Fatah, the leading Palestinian political entity at the time, who still are in the West Bank. But let's say the response was rather excessively colorful. They called him a traitor for cooperating with terrorists. They called him a Nazi and an anti-Semite because, of course they did. That's what they call people they disagree with. And some of the activity at the protests was rather explicitly openly violent and threatening. Now, Netanyahu didn't repeat the more violent or threatening rhetoric with his own mouth, but he also didn't condemn it. And he did show up to rallies and protests where that was going on and hold speeches and show support and encouragement. And it's understandable that people felt that his mere presence as a mainstream, recognizable political entity sort of co-signed and legitimized that type of violent rhetoric. That he might be helping the violent sentiment grow, and if it got out of hand, something bad might happen. And those people's concerns became a reality when one of those far-right supporters took matters into his own hands and ended the prime minister's life. I believe that Netanyahu's least favorite bit of the Oslo Accords was the founding of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. See, for the first time, there was actually an official, recognized Palestinian governing entity. And when Israel signed the Oslo Accords, they legitimized that entity. See, when there's an official governing entity, there's actually someone to negotiate with. When there was no one to officially represent the Palestinian people, the prospects of any future Palestinian statehood were impossible, because who is going to represent them in the negotiation? Which is why Netanyahu has spent an awful lot of his career actively trying to illegitimize the Palestinian Authority, trying to undo the damage. One of the ways he's done that is by indirectly bolstering Hamas, by helping them grow. Allegedly. I should say allegedly. Essentially, the accusation is that he and his government have utilized their still rather dominant control of the Gaza Strip through their blockade that surrounds most of their borders, their coastline, and their airspace. Really everything except this tiny border to Egypt all the way in the south, which I bring up because the pro-Zionist argument likes to mention this as some sort of justification as to why this sphere of oppression is not really a problem, because there's this tiny little pocket in it. Although the Americans and Israelis did collaborate with the Egyptians to build their border wall here, so it's not unreasonable to think that there might also be some sort of unspoken understanding on that end too. Anyway, the accusation is that they've utilized this control of basically everything that goes in and out of Gaza to make sure that Hamas have access to things that the Palestinian Authority do not. Access to funding, to resources, the freedom to operate in a way so that the people of Gaza see Hamas succeeding in areas where their counterparts cannot, and thereby bolstering their popularity. And the reasoning is simple, right? Creating political division within Palestine gives you an excuse to avoid engaging in serious long-term negotiation. You can basically just say, well, how can I negotiate for a two-state solution or Palestinian sovereignty when they're so divided? You've got Hamas ruling here and Fatah ruling there. Who am I supposed to negotiate with? Which is an argument Netanyahu has used many, many times. There are even claims made that he has explicitly told members of the Israeli Knesset that the most surefire way to ensure that Palestinians will never have a state of their own is to help Hamas grow and bolster their popularity. He does, of course, deny that these claims are true. You know, he also denies the existence of a famine that we can all see plain as day, so grain of salt. I'd like to add here that this is indeed a long and complicated story, and I have glossed over a lot of it for the sake of making a video. Particularly, I've glossed over decades worth of brutality, violence, and oppression. So I'd like to add that if you did want to make a population start favoring a more religiously radical, more openly militant group over their more secular counterparts, the most effective way to do that is brutality. You take their homes and their freedoms, you arrest and detain them without official charges, you position yourself as an unchallengeable authority. You make a more radical response the only option, and then you use the radical response as justification for further brutality. And then rinse and repeat and round we go until eventually we end up where we are now, in final solution territory.